Welcome to Discover the Difference, a podcast brought to you by C3. I'm your host, Jamie Reed, alongside my buddy here, Gabriel Earl. Today on the show, we have Elisabeth Cardiello. Elisabeth is that shot of energy you need. She's a cup of curiosity. Everything about her is inspirational. She's been a TedX speaker. Her coffee company was featured in a Netflix docuseries. She founded a unique coffee company called Caffè Unimatic that you have to learn more about, as well as being the founder of Brave, a framework to instill and promote culture within organizations. And it also just helps you in every aspect of enriching relationships in your life. Enjoy this episode of Discover the Difference with Elisabeth Cardiello. We're reading a little bit of a rap sheet on you. Of course, we got the inside intel from our team who got to hear you speak at one of the AssureX conferences, and literally everybody fell in love with you and the time that they had there with you. But I don't think it does it justice. You know, you're a TEDx speaker, you're a motivational speaker, TEDx veteran, I guess, involved with Netflix series, you run a company, you played D1 soccer, you're a CrossFit trainer. I'm like, you're like a superhero of sorts. What's a little bit of the backstory? Like, who, before you became all this, were you a normal person growing up, or did this just emerge overnight?
I feel like my background is probably what made me weird. Growing up was a really odd experience for me. I mean, as opposed to other kids. So my dad came from Italy when he emigrated. He came to Brooklyn when he was like 12. He was 51 when I was born. And like my parents were together. I think I was an oops. I'm not really sure. But like I was kind of more like his sidekick than I was his child. So he made me my first business cards when I was 6. And my nonna would crochet me little purses, and I would walk around with my little purse with my business cards in them and hand them out. Like, I thought it was
What did they say? What did
Yeah.
what did the business card say?
So my dad did this very impactful thing that I didn't realize was important until later in life. So it was for his business. At that point, he owned a restaurant. He had done a bunch of he was a crazy entrepreneur. So he was always starting things. But at that time in my life, he owned a restaurant in Brooklyn. And so his business card just said his name, and Peter Cardiello, and mine said Elisabeth Cardiello. And beneath it, it said owner. And I was the owner. And so I was like 6 years old, pigtails, mind you, walking around so proud to be the owner of this restaurant that everybody knew. And
So smart on his part.
it truly was. And like it's evolved in what it's meant to me over the years. But I mean, he and I started business. I mean, our way of spending time together was sitting at the breakfast table for hours, like to the point where my mom would go upstairs, get dressed, come down, be like making lunch. And she's like, you guys haven't moved. The coffee's gone. What are you doing? And we would take ideas from idea to like international level something. We would figure out marketing. But I was always so interested in essentially like the psychology and the people aspect of things. And because of one of his mentors was a guy named Norman Vincent Peale. So the guy that literally wrote the book on the power of positive thought. And so because of that, he worked with so many people in so many capacities that were now so psychologically based that like I was in heaven just asking like, well, why did they do that? Well, how did they do that? Well, how did you talk this police officer that had retired from the force and had to give back his badge and his gun? Like they called you at 2 a.m. He was on suicide watch. What did you say to him to talk him off the ledge? Like I was just endlessly fascinated. And so fast forward, I'm I'm a little bit, I don't know, different. Different is a good word.
So is that something that your father instilled in you along the way, this idea of positive thought, or was that the main theme, or was it just asking questions?
It was both. I mean, it was he always thought very, very differently. So many kids would be asked like, what did you learn today? What did you succeed at today? I was asked how many times I failed. Because he was like, well, if you didn't fail at anything, then you weren't really trying anything that was hard. So like it was kind of a cakewalk for you. So like, what was the point of the day? And so he flipped things on me a lot, but it was also, I mean, every day I heard what the mind can conceive, the mind can achieve. So it was very much like, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. Your choice. Have
Walt
at
Disney
it.
effect.
And so, I mean, I remember when positive psychology essentially was invented, created, whatever. Um, when they could put fMRIs in your brain and they could see what was happening, I would I hadn't done any education in it yet, but I would be finishing people's sentences about like, well, if you do this, then that happens. Well, if you think this way, then this happens. And they'd be like, why do you know this, you weirdo? And I mean, for Norman, it wasn't science. It was just what he believed and what he saw over time. And I mean, and my dad just kind of absorbed and was someone who learned as much as he could all the time. And I don't know, here I am.
What was the first time you set off on your own entrepreneurial spirit where he didn't hand you a purse with a business card in it?
Um, I mean, the beginning of my life, he and I started a bunch of things together. And interestingly, I have this streak of originality where if he had anything to do with it, I was like, well, it's his. It's not mine. It's his. And he would get so bless him. He would get so mad at me that like I didn't want to do it because he had more of the idea or like he did more or like he had more of a hand in it. So, I mean, genuinely it wasn't until actually there was something I did a couple things in college that weren't businesses, but things that I had started that like no one else had a hand in. I was so proud of them. Um, and it was like starting a support fund for a student that was from Sudan, and he was a refugee from Sudan, and his brothers were still there and needed help and needed to be able to pay for school. So we raised a bunch of money for him and all this. But the first business, unfortunately, the one that I still have, I started after losing my dad, and I think I took for granted that he was just going to be there, and we were going to find something together, or maybe he just pushed me towards something. It was like I didn't want him to be so involved in it because I wanted it to be mine, but I also really wanted him to be there. And then when he wasn't, it was like, oh God, last chance, go. So the coffee company is the one that I stuck with, like really stuck with. And I think it was actually because of the opposite. It was because he wasn't technically part of it, but totally was. And that was like my last shot. And then now Brave, I mean, which feels like the coffee company was preserving his legacy very much, and Brave is building on that. I kind of figured myself out and then started leaving my own or putting roots down to leave my own.
So how does the coffee company come around, and how is that connected to your father?
So his biggest business that he started when he was in this country was a stainless steel cookware company. So like pots and pans for the kitchen, basically. And he kind of amassed everything for the kitchen and they distributed and all these things. And he loved it. And it was, I mean, he called himself a specialty salesman. That was like, he worked at, he worked at a company called Regalware, wherever is also where Zig Ziglar worked, which I'm like finding all the stuff out now that like, oh wait, they might have actually known each other. And so it just, when you asked him his profession, he didn't, entrepreneur wasn't a thing. It wasn't cool then. I'm not even sure that word existed. He said he was a specialty salesman, and communication and relationships were always his currency pretty much. And so being from Italy, doing pots and pans for the kitchen, he was like, coffee, Americans love you, but your coffee is horrendous. What are you thinking? And the percolator, what was popular at that point, it was the 50s. And sometimes it made good coffee and sometimes it was a total train wreck. And he's like, I got it. Like, he wasn't the type that was like, just drink Italian coffee. He was like, no, I want to leave an impact. Like, I want to help American coffee. So he took the way that his mom stove back in Southern Italy in the 1930s worked and crossed it with the percolator and created this thing called the Unimatic. So United Cookware was the name of his company, and it was an automatic percolator. So he put the two together, had an engineer write the patent on it, and sold the thing. I mean, it made the greatest coffee, sold a bunch, did a bunch of things. He had a bunch of health problems. So he was in a car accident when I was 10 and had major brain surgery. He had heart attacks, high blood pressure, open heart surgery, aortic aneurysms. I mean, like, you name it. So also from the time I was 6, I was very aware of, I didn't really know the word for it, but like the nervous system and what stress does to you or can do to you. And so, I mean, ever since I was probably around 5 or 6, maybe once a week for a lot of my life, maybe a little less than that, his blood pressure would go up. He could feel it. My mom would take his blood pressure, and they could tell, like, it's high, it's bad. And they'd do this weird thing where they sent me over to talk to him. And I would just have a conversation with him, and I would bring his blood pressure down. And I mean, I didn't know there was science behind what I was doing. I just thought I was a unicorn, and they told me I was a unicorn, and I thought that was the greatest
We got the
thing.
Elizabeth effect, right?
Yeah, so I was just like, this is great. Well, when I was a teenager, it got a little harder, and and I could tell, oh, this isn't gonna work this time. And I started
That's
being
because you got harder or because it got harder?
It's because I couldn't control my emotions as much as I could. Like, I couldn't
Oh, yeah,
stay.
interacting with them.
I was a teenager, and I was an emotional
Yeah.
I was a girl. Like, I was an emotional teenager. And if I didn't agree, I didn't agree. And I didn't know enough to be like, shh, but I could tell when it didn't work. And then I started studying, like, well, I feel like there's something behind what I did, but I couldn't find anything. Like, classes didn't teach you can change someone's nervous system by the conversation you had. Anyway, I'm digressing from coffee, but this is what led me to Brave. Coffee, however, we would sit at the table, and I mean, we used the Unimatic on my table since I was a kid, since before I was born. And he would all I mean, it's what made us sit at the table together for all those hours, because it would keep the coffee hot, the way that it functioned. It made great coffee, and you could put it on your table and it would stay warm. And so fast forward, lost him when I was 26, um, to aortic aneurysms. And I had to clean out. I mean, I became the husband and father in the family. I had to pay my mom's mortgage. I had to figure out his businesses and life. And I was working in finance at the time. Um, and long story short, I went to clean out his old office in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. You know how like buildings are connected in Brooklyn? Like, you can't really tell, like, it's one doesn't start and then the other, like, one doesn't stop and the other starts. That's just like one big long. So I was cleaning it out, and I mean, this place was like a 1960s time warp. Um, and I opened this door that he called the inventory closet, that I was like, great, I'll find weird stuff. I don't know, stationery from like one of your 9,000 businesses. The man made stationery for anytime, I swear, anytime he incorporated anything, he made stationery. I don't know, maybe that was a thing. And so I opened this door that was under lock and key that I never really thought twice about. And I was met with a wall of boxes, and it was boxes of this coffee pot. And I was like, great, I'm 26. Everyone I know is getting married. Wedding presents for a year. Great. Put them in the car. Let's go. Well, put them in the car, put the next round in the car. The car's full. Okay, well, let's just stack them over here. How many can there be? It's a closet. Well, 3 hours later, realized it wasn't a closet at all. It was the door to a warehouse. The building went back, and no one really ever knew. And so I actually had found the door to a closet, not a closet, a warehouse of these old coffee pots. And I don't know, when like your life flashes before your eyes and you're like, my mom was like,
This is a sign.
overstock.com? And I was like, stay away from them. They're mine. I don't know anything about what I'm going to do with them yet, but I'm going to. And I don't know, like, I just saw all of our conversations from childhood on, and that coffee pot was in the middle of the table. And it's like, if it had like a rewind button on it, like, she heard all of our stories. Like, she could have recorded them. It was just, And the thought of, this is what made us a tight-knit family. Like, this is one of the things that made us close. And they gave me my confidence. They gave me, I don't know, who I was. And so my immediate thought was like, if I can, I don't know how many are in here, it's a few thousand. But it was like, well, if I can give this to even a few thousand other families, like, and that starts me on some entrepreneurial journey, like, great, I'm in. And that's where it started, and then made a line of coffee that was actually roasted for the way that the Unimatic brews, which in the States we don't do that. Like, if you guys had coffee in Europe somewhere, yeah, and it's always better. There's just a reason for that. Other than they've been doing it forever. They roast coffee, like they effectively, everywhere else they make coffee in one way. They have one way to brew. We have, I mean, AirPress, French press, drip, pour over. That, if you reduce it to a science experiment, it's the extraction time. How long does the water touch the grounds? What are the temperatures? Is the water coming up to temperature with the coffee or separately? Like, are the coffee grounds sitting in the water? Like, if it's a science experiment, there's so many variables. And other countries roast their coffee to ready it for the exact chemical process that's going to happen when they're brewing. We roast coffee and we make it a different way every day. So of course it doesn't taste right, because the coffee that we roast is just roasted. And so that's why you get a lot of that bitterness. So we made our coffee to be roasted for the Unimatic so that it's the smoothest coffee you will literally ever taste. No bitterness, no anything.
Can you, for people who are listening, just describe what this pot is? And like, we're looking at a picture of it and it kind of looks like a kettle pot of some sort, but could you just describe it? Because I don't, it looks also uniquely different from a kettle pot. What it is, how it works exactly.
So if you think about, if any of you have, if you know what a percolator is, a lot of people's grandparents had a percolator. So it's the kind of coffee that perks because of its name. It's the only way to make your whole house smell like coffee. So that's one. The way that it functions is you put water sort of in this well. It's kind of a cross between like a mocha pot and a percolator. You put the water in the well, you put the stem in, you put the coffee in the basket, the stem holds the basket up, and then the coffee perks, right? And the water perks up and then drips over the grounds and drips through and continues. It's a takeoff on the percolator. So he put a heating element on the bottom. I mean, I think it's really beautiful. It looks like a very 1960s work of art type thing. That's when they were made. And so it does look kind of vintage and old school. They were physically made in Italy back in the 60s, in a factory in Parma. And so he basically he did a bunch of things to make it different, but to automate the percolation process, because for percolators, they'd either make good coffee, but the problem with them was that you had to watch them. So for a normal percolator, when the coffee starts perking, if you don't hear it or know exactly when it started, it could start perking and you don't know it. And if it perks for too long, if you think of the process, it's perking the water up, dripping through the coffee and coming down. So you're making coffee the whole time and you have to know when to turn it off, or you're going to be making coffee from coffee. And that's when it kind of starts to taste like motor oil. It can be really, really bad. You can burn it. It can explode. There can be all kinds of not fun things that happen with it. But he put a heating element on the bottom. So effectively, the stove is beneath this heating element. The flame is never touching the pot itself. It's touching this heating element. The heating element is what essentially transfers the heat and makes the pot perk. When it starts to perk, you then, the little glass knob on the top. Normally, that's not a knob. It's not a valve. It doesn't open and close. With the Unimatic, it opens and closes. So it starts in the closed position. When it starts to perk, you actually open it very gingerly. And then you turn the flame off. And the heating element allows the heating element has now retained the right amount of heat to keep it perking for 7 minutes for an exact amount of time, so that it makes the perfect consistent cup of coffee every time. And you're not, when did it start? Uh-oh, did I set a timer right? Oh, I walked away and I forgot about it. Now it's gross. You effectively can't mess it up. So, I mean, those are the most obvious changes that he made, aside from it being really pretty. But to me, the coolest part is also, aside from the fact that I'm now ruined. I can't drink coffee anywhere. I take one of these things everywhere I go. Sorry, not sorry.
That's a
But
big piece to check in.
yeah. Um, but people, I mean, because they heard my story and the fact that I was able to keep my dad at the table with us in some way through this coffee pot, I have people all around the world that tell me, I named my Unimatic Grace because of my grandmother. I adopted this
Oh, that's
pot
cool.
when I lost my fiance. Like, and they're able to have coffee with them every morning in a way that, because I was just very honest and vulnerable and just going through the process very openly, other people were kind of able to as well. And so all of them are uniquely numbered because there are only so many. And from the beginning, it was like you adopt them into your family. They're not just a thing. This was part of my family. It was there for all of our stories. It heard everything. So ideally, it's part of yours. So like people have been like, it's in my will. I know who's going to get it, and they're really going to appreciate. Like, it is the sweetest thing I could ever imagine.
What do you think your father's motivation was with sitting down and having these conversations? Was it really about connecting, or was he really thinking about, oh, I got to make sure that she's an entrepreneur? Was that really important to him?
I mean, whether it was that I was an entrepreneur or whether it was that I wanted to be it, whether it was that I knew I could if I wanted to be, um, he was very, very strategic. So I became aware pretty early in life that like almost every conversation he ever had with anyone, there was a reason for. So like I would start asking like, okay, so why'd you say that? Like, why'd you say that to grandma? Like, so I'm sure there was a reason. I'm pretty sure it was a combination of both. Like that's how he connected, but also he wanted to instill certain things. And I mean, I think he knew he was also kind of weird. Like, I mean, he was the kind that knew so many things. Like he was in intelligence for the army here in America for a while. So like, I don't know too much, but fast forward to having a mentor who was a hostage negotiator. Well, now two of them. And they were like, you realize that he effectively taught you hostage negotiation without any of the words or telling you what you knew. And I was like, oh, really? So there was just, I think maybe he knew he was older and he wanted to pass things on early, and he didn't buy into, oh, you're too young to learn that. He was just like, let's do it. Whatever is going to stick is going to stick.
Was there in all the positive mindset and framing he taught you, was there a moment that you can recall where a failure came into your life and he taught you how to reframe that into a positive mindset? Or did you naturally view failure as positive, similar to how he would have been, and so you received it that way?
I think if I'm being honest, that's an amazing question, by the way. I think if I'm being honest, for as long as I had him, I didn't have to do it myself. I could go to him and be like, here's what happened. And like, bleh. And he could help me reframe it. I think losing him was the first thing that I had to reframe by myself. And it is entirely what made me who I am now and changed me and put me on the path of, I don't know, becoming the woman that I actually wanted to be. But I think becoming the woman that I would have become at some point, but it was the first time I had to do it by myself. And I didn't have someone to turn to. And it was completely an internal process that I was effectively forced to go on because he wasn't there to help me.
Can you tell
I'm
us a
sure there
little
were
bit
little
about what that
ones
was like?
along
I'm
the
sure
way,
there were
but
little ones.
Can because can you tell us a little bit about what that was like? Because a lot of people talk about, some of the worst things that have happened to them, death and family members and losing people is, kind of is transformational. It sounds like that's kind of what you're saying. And I think it's hard for people to understand that either haven't gone through it or maybe they're in it right now. So can you kind of talk through that? And like, was that just like one day, after he passed, the next day you were good and you were decided to become this? I'm kind of being a little bit sarcastic in that way, but really just kind of that journey through that, that time. What was that like?
I mean, I think the thing that he had instilled that helped a lot was, and I don't think I did it consciously, but so I learned later because someone said, you are the textbook, like what we teach the US Army to do before they go into war. You are textbook mental resilience. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, because he never used words like that. He just sort of gave me breadcrumbs to follow, I think. And I think some of it was also just what I was interested in. But let's back up. Hard things happen. You can either let them hold you back, which effectively is PTSD, right? Like it cages you, it holds you back. You don't want to engage in anything. Or no one talks about the fact that there's an opposite of PTSD, which is actually called post-traumatic growth, which I became obsessed with. I had 13 years ago, and like found it somewhere and then just like dove in, like head first dove in. And it was about finding your purpose. And I think I, in a sense, got lucky that I found these coffee pots because I had something I was able to pour myself into. And so also a year and a
No
half
pun
after.
intended.
Hmm?
No pun intended.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, that was a dad. He's supposed to tell the dad jokes, but here I am. That's two now.
No, I love it. I'm all for it. So I think there's something about I had something to give myself to. So a year and a half after losing him, my mom's home was hit by Hurricane Sandy. So home and safety, and like we couldn't live there for a year. And like I moved home to help her. And so like safety nets were just gone. And there was something that, because I had this coffee company, I had something that reminded me of who I was and what I stood for. And it got me up every day, even if I couldn't really do much with it because I had to like, knock down the walls in the house or, whatever it was. But there's something really special about, you can't appreciate it when you're going through it, because and it took me a long time. It was a decade before I wanted to be able to tell a story that didn't completely focus on my dad. And for a while, I swore that this coffee company was just the way for me to not be the weird kid that wanted to talk about her dad that had passed away, because none of my friends had lost parents. But because of this, I could kind of still talk about him and it not be weird. And it was odd, but it allowed me to share and be open and be to a degree vulnerable about like where I was. And I could very clearly say, like, we all know what happened. So like, I'm not feeling great today. I'll call you tomorrow. Right. And I think there was something about allowing myself to be in that allowed me to get through it faster. And so post-traumatic growth is effectively letting that hard thing, it doesn't hurt any less, it doesn't suck any less, but letting that hard thing give you purpose and letting it push you forward. And so it was like, okay, well, if you're not here, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to make you really proud. I'm going to do something so awesome with these that I'm going to feel you here. Right. And like, it just, like, there wasn't another option in my head, just because, maybe because there was just so much, your mindset is your choice, that was poured into me for so long. But the end of the grief cycle is gratitude. You don't get there fast. You don't get there fast at all. And it's always still, I can't say I'm grateful for losing him, but I am grateful for who I became on the journey that I think was just accelerated after losing him. So like, it's almost like I really wish he could know me now kind of thing. Um, so for people in the middle of it, like, don't expect to be like, some days you'll be happy. Some days you're going to be a train wreck. It comes in waves. It is not linear. You will not understand it, nor are you supposed to. Like, you're just, it's
It
not
sounds
gonna
like you sort of chose, you frame it in that PTSD versus, post traumatic growth. It's like you chose immersion rather than avoidance, like good, bad, indifferent. You just immersed in it and then emerged through as to this positive place. And what I'm curious, because to paraphrase what I think you said earlier was that Caffè Unimatic was like, in honor of him, or, in relation through that story you told about finding the pots. I think you also referenced that Brave was like taking it up a notch or to another dynamic. Can you kind of walk us through that relationship?
Yeah. So it's funny. I did this weird thing after losing him. So I wrote, no one knew I was doing this because it was all kind of so sudden that no one asked any, like my mom or I, it was the only two of us. No one asked us for a eulogy. And I know, like, I was aware of, like, in all this preparation, like, no one said anything about this. And I was like, well, that can't go on. Like, I can't let that not happen. So I was like up all night the night before all the services, wrote something. It was the first time I had ever spoken in front of people. I can still feel like I was holding onto the podium and my knees were shaking. But I wrote his eulogy, and then not long after, I did this. I think this is probably a pretty standard thing in personal development now, but I didn't know that. But I wrote his and was like, the person that you were, I want that to be said about me and the path that I was on. I worked at a hedge fund. I was successful by normal standards, but like I hated what I did. I didn't want to be anybody on the executive team. I didn't want that to be my life. But I didn't know, I didn't have the idea yet. I didn't know what to do. I just, and as a type A New Yorker, you go find the hardest job to get out of business school and you go find it. And when you land it, you're like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to do this and prove to myself that I can. Um, but I wrote my own eulogy. And it's funny, I turned 40 last week and I read it again for the first time in years. And it actually describes Brave to a T, which is terrifying because I knew that I would do something in this realm, but like I had no idea, no breadcrumbs, nothing had started. Like it was coffee, but I didn't know anything else. So all of this, it started as purpose and confidence and then kind of kept evolving. And so Cafe Unimatic's mission is to bring Italian values back to the world, sitting around the table, right? By bringing the world back to the table over coffee, because coffee is where you do that. And then I think the thing that naturally just started happening was, well, I really want families to sit around the table. Well, a lot of families aren't getting along when they sit around the table. Like, and there's something that I would do with him when we had a conversation that I could lower his blood pressure. I could change his state. I could change everything by the way that I listened to you, by the way that I looked at you, by the way that I interacted with you. And so dove headfirst into studying anything I could find about, oh my God, whether it was positive psychology, interpersonal neurobiology, like you name it. I mean, the stuff I read is pretty dense and geeky. But I found it fascinating and finally figured out I was about to start doing the research around there is something between conversation and your nervous system, because everything in the mainstream was, meditation and mindfulness and like methods of self-regulation, which are great. Like do them corporate wellness programs, fantastic. But more like, but if you're a leader, it just seemed like, well, yeah, you need to do that. But what if your people, what if it's not enough? What if they don't have the capacity to stop and go meditate? And what if they keep just kind of flying off the handle or like saying things or doing things and like acting in a state of essentially threat, and they're doing things and they're wrong and they're making the wrong decisions and it's just not good. How do you be that person that can go and have a conversation with them and change their state and get them to a place of having access to the parts of your brain, problem solving, creativity, connection, like pretty important parts that go offline when you're stressed out? So I mean, it started as asking really big questions and saying like, who do you want to be? What do you want to give? What do you want to leave behind? And it started as something based around a methodology that builds confidence. And it was called Legacy Out Loud at that point. And then fast forward, we realized that it wasn't about, I thought it was about the questions. Like, we're not asking good enough questions. And then I was like, oh, it's not about the questions. Anybody can ask the questions you ask, but they're not going to get the answers that you're getting. The answers that you're getting are because of the space you created, because of the way you're listening. And listening was effectively what had changed my dad's state as well. And like I could tell enough that like there's a thread here. There's something with the vagus nerve that like I can see it. I don't know what it is, and I wasn't trained in that at that point, and like I didn't know, but I kind of knew. So sort of just blindly following intuition, and research now shows that there's something about when you create psychological safety, people can tell the truth. And that's why I was getting such, I mean, people would answer, who do you want to be? What do you want to give? And what do you want to leave behind? They'd tell me things that they're like, I've never said this out loud. I've always wanted to do this and I've never said it out loud. It's like, well, why me? Like cab drivers in New York City, like you name it. And at first I was like, oh, it's because I'm asking better questions. But there was something more. And so in realizing that, we codified the structure of how we listen and then started teaching it to leaders so that they could replicate it in meetings, in really important meetings, in day-to-day meetings, in your daily stand-up, in whatever. And it changes, I mean, it changes people. It changes the safety of an organization. It changes the culture, and it does it relatively quickly. So Brave kind of emerged. Brave is an acronym, obviously. So it's a framework for how to listen. And so it was kind of like, well,
is it geared towards businesses, like business training, or is it for in general?
the fun part is it's geared toward leaders. I mean, my technical market, I guess you'd say, is leaders at fast growing companies. Because when your company is growing really fast, like your culture is exacerbated because you think, oh, the culture is great. Everything's going well. Let's rocket ship this thing. Let's go. Let's take it to the moon. And then you ask your people to do, that's interesting. You ask your people to do more with less, faster. And I have no idea. And something happens and you completely walk your people off what I call the culture cliff. And it's like, have you ever read Crossing the Chasm? Um, it's a book technically about marketing, but crossing the chasm to mass market adoption is like, you have the early adopters and the innovators, but you want to cross that chasm and serve more people, right? You want to get to the majority, like the early majority, the late majority. To do that, you have to change the way that you market. And so he was saying the chasm is like, you're talking about it as like this new thing. The way you need to talk about it is this tried and true and tested and reliable thing for many people to get on board. At that moment, my perspective is at that moment where you have to change your marketing and do your rebranding to reach more people, you're also, if you look at your culture, you're being faced with burnout, bottleneck, bureaucracy. Your culture that was great, because you didn't give your people a structure for that culture and a way to have hard conversations, to disagree, to do things faster, to whatever, to take care of each other. They didn't we don't get taught how to do that in school. And so your culture goes off the deep end, falls off the cliff. And so I call it the culture chasm, but you need, if you're in that high growth phase, you need something to actually build up and maintain your culture and help your leaders do that, because it's started by leaders. So our market is leaders inside of companies, but the best thing I'm ever told, which is also constantly, because it's just what this is made for, like, we brought you in to help our leadership team get through this time, to change our culture, to whatever. But what you actually also did, which we didn't anticipate, was you saved my marriage. You had made me have a relationship with my mother again, which I never thought I would have. Like, my teenagers talking to me again. Like, my 6-year-old now wants to hang around daddy. She never wanted to hang around daddy. I'm a single dad, and I was always the one that she didn't like. And it just, there are so many, it's conversation. It's built, I mean, Brave is built on the human brain. So it works on everyone, whether you're 6 or 60. And, it doesn't matter if you're a leader at a corporation, it also works around the table at home over coffee. So
That's amazing. You think about some of the stuff that what we've been doing is, bringing in life coaching for the leaders. But it sounds like this is kind of an all-inclusive program. And I noticed that you're a life coach. Is that
yeah. Yeah.
is that
That
something you
too.
got into late? You got into later, or you?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that it was kind of like, I might as well just get the certification, because I often act in that capacity anyway, or I'm asked to act in that capacity anyway. So it's like, let me just make sure that, like, let me get the certification and, like, make sure I know. And it was like, oh, they teach you Brave. They effectively teach you versions of what this is. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's the cool part, I think, is being able to see what people are capable of. I mean, I feel like everything has kind of revolved around high performance in some capacity. So whether it's high performing leaders and teams, or your family, or CrossFit, or athletics, right? Like, for me, it was always about finding the thing that actually boosted you to be able to perform better, and then go all in.
Is that really? I mean, is the core of it is helping people regulate their nervous system so that they can perform at the highest level, or what's the core of the program?
I mean, pretty much. I mean, if you think about humans, we act like we can leave our human at home, or take our human, like, we take our human to work and we take our human home. So everywhere we go, there we are, right? And if there's something hard going on at work, we're going to take it home. And if there's something hard going on at home, we're going to take it to work, even though we try not to. And so, you know, personality tests, and don't get me wrong, I've taken the Enneagram, the MBTI, all the things I've been obsessed with. I mean, I remember I had a class in business school that was the MBTI, and I was like, were you watching me? How do you know this about me? This is wild. And I will say, every time I'm inside of a company that has done something with one of them, they're positioned as, you're going to learn your style and all of your coworkers' styles so that you can communicate better. And it sounds great, but reality is, when you're having a really stressful, high stakes, intense conversation, the probability of you remembering your type and all the nuances, their type and all the nuances, and what to do in that situation, you have no shot. Like, there's no chance. Um, and so rather than remember 10 types, and because my partner didn't take the Enneagram, well, I don't know how to interact with him because he didn't take it. No, that's not at all. Like, there are a few things that, regardless of who it is, how old they are, where they grew up, what their culture is, what their beliefs are, you can listen to them in a way that can actually bring them back down to neutral and give them access to the parts of their brain that are going to allow them to take actions that make them proud of themselves, right? And whether that's at home, that you're not saying something stupid that you don't mean because you're stressed out and you had a bad day and someone didn't say thank you for something. Once you can, I mean, a lot of the way that I describe it with leaders when we're doing like a more intensive training is we all have this inner noise and we think we can hear other people, but really the way the brain works, we just hear our own biases and our own thoughts and our own fears typically. So I call it your internal noise. We all have different flavors of it. You can figure out what it is. You can identify it. And once you get good at identifying it for you, you can actually get really good at identifying it for the people around you. And then you can start to quiet theirs. And that is a superpower. And once you can do that, you can, you know how, I don't know, a mentor or a partner or a good friend can walk into a room, you just say hello, and they're like, what's wrong? Something's off. What happened? That's what Brave does. Like it's a framework to help you be able to do that with anybody at almost any time.
It's interesting because I think where Gabe and I, you know, before we started the podcast, you and I were talking about our organization, the research you did and stuff like that. And we probably deploy it. I mean, we have to carefully interact and constantly engage to nurture culture, right? And so does every other person in your whole organization. So whether it be that or a lot of this threads through to sales too, because you know we start as a sales organization, then convert to a service organization. And when I look at the acronym BRAVE being present, rapport, active listening, vulnerability, empathy, I think we end up coming back to coaching curiosity the most, like just how to genuinely be curious, because that feeds into all 5 of these things and creates that level of relationship, you know, to where maybe you're bringing blood pressure down or whatnot. So the question I have for you is, when you come into an organization like ours, what's the most common thing that you find that isn't allowing that culture to breathe and have a pulse like they want it to?
I mean, there are a lot of things. The thing that comes to mind that has been the most recent, there are a couple of things. One, the way that I sort of describe empathy is curiosity rather than judgment, right? Like curiosity over judgment. The rest of the acronym, the sequence of it slows you down and gets you self-aware enough to be able to be curious in a moment, like in a split second, rather than be like, huh? Right? Because that'll put someone into stress, right? If you're their leader and they're like, oh my God, you didn't understand me. Inside of organizations, even ones that have amazing cultures, there are typically leaders that are like, I don't know, but this still isn't working. I am having this performance conversation and like, I don't know, nothing's changing. Or there's always someone or a handful of leaders that are like, there's something more, like there's something else. And what we usually see is you have really good intentions. Leaders have amazing intentions all the time. I've never really met a leader that had poor intentions, but we don't know the science behind the stuff and we don't know how to execute what we mean to be doing. So because we intend to be empathetic or open or curious or what present with people, we think that because we intend it, we're coming off that way. And we don't often ask other people, am I coming off that way? How am I doing? The whole 360-degree feedback thing, but like people can't actually be honest, but they want to be honest, but they can't, but they don't know how. Again, well-intentioned, poor execution. So, I mean, even if we just take the B stands for be present. When we're talking about really high performers, the B is first for a reason. Being present to me is the opposite of diving in to fix someone. So as a leader, we often think our job is to be the fixer. We're rewarded for being the fixers by society.
I thought she was going to say as men. Men too.
I mean, it's also a very male.
We have to unprogram that out of our brains. We're hardwired that way. It's like being married to a woman has been the best thing to help me understand that. We have to like unprogram that. Or a vast majority of us do.
Well, I think it was also it was modeled, right?
That's true.
To be the fixer.
Yeah.
And so
totally.
It's the caveman days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was and I also had to dive into my masculine when we lost my dad and I became the breadwinner for my family, and I had to block and tackle and fix all the problems, and I just put on my masculine hat and rolled with it. So I'm a recovering fixer too. But sometimes I have to say to male leaders, has anyone ever said to you, "Stop trying to fix me, just listen"? And they're like, "Oh yeah." It's like, "Okay,
Oh
I
yeah.
have your attention.
We
This is
all
what we're
have.
talking about."
They're lying if they don't say that.
I know. So
Mia's laughing. You thinking about your husband over there?
about all of you.
Oh, okay.
I love it. So something that I see often is leaders of any kind doing things like micromanaging, diving into fix, burning people out, being the bottleneck because they want to be in control. They mean well. They want to make sure everything goes okay. They want to make sure that they sign off on everything so that everything goes smoothly. Half because they want their team to be successful, half because they want to be successful. Status management. This is normal. What we don't realize is that we are robbing our people of their own path to resilience, of their own path to finding their purpose and post-traumatic growth and resilient. That's what resilience is. When someone comes to us with a problem and we dive into fix, we're not letting them figure it out. Thus, we're not empowering them. So the whole be curious, empower people. The moment someone comes to you and you're like, "Oh, go do this," or "I did this when this happened," and you give them something, you've just stopped them in their tracks from growth and been above them and been like the leader. Whereas something different to maybe try on is, "Wow, yeah, that sounds really hard. But like, you've got this. I've got your back if you need me, obviously, but what do you think you should do?" And then shut up. Say nothing and just sit there.
We need her to talk to some
Yeah.
people.
We should. Isn't that what we should be doing with our kids too?
Yes.
100%.
100%.
It's like
behavior.
it's the
right
opposite
there.
of helicopter parent.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting because we do have that. No, we have mostly women leaders in our organization. We have a lot of female leaders, so it does transcend both male and female.
Oh yeah.
Because we have to counsel. I had a conversation with a leader in our organization, and I was like, why don't you let him try that idea? It was a woman that had a guy underneath him in a sales role, and she's like, "'Cause I know it'll fail." And I said, "Yeah, but instead of telling him it's going to fail, why don't you let him fail?" She's like, "So you want me to let him waste 2 to 3 months of time and he fails?" And I was like, failure is the greatest learning experience you can have on earth. Now you can ask questions to help him accelerate learning, but rather than just telling him he's going to fail, he's going to resent you.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're stopping his momentum, stopping his ability. I was like, why don't you just ask him questions? And if he wants to keep going that way, then let him go, because he's going to learn it. He's not going to hurt anybody. It's not that kind of issue. So when you see somebody, male or female, that is in that controlling mindset, how do you break through? Like, I know you have this whole framework that's a program, but if you could describe it in a sentence or a short explanation, how do you get through?
Yeah, because we want to avoid also telling that person how to do
their
how
job.
to do it
Yeah.
either, how to ask the questions.
That's a good point.
So we have to also
Yeah.
bring them along to that place without telling.
Right. I mean, I think some of it, a lot of leaders like kind of that I'm the scapegoat. So it's like, we're giving our leaders this development. It's going to help you here at work. It's going to help you at home. It's going to help you in your well-being. It's going to help you with literally everything. So like, you're welcome. Here's our gift to you. Ideally, it also helps with like high performance and growth and velocity and all those things you want in your business too. But being able to have a scapegoat to be like, learn these things. People need to want to grow, and there are definitely leaders that want to grow, and some other leaders aren't quite there yet, but maybe when they see this group growing and the outcomes and the way that they change. And because it's pretty it's pretty tangible, the way that people change and the way that they lead and manage and treat people, and just their disposition changes. Um, and so sometimes it's maybe they're ready to dive in. And I mean, a lot of it is self-reflection, self-awareness. I mean, my joke is the ABCs of becoming brave. First, it's going to show up as awareness, which may come a day after you had a hard conversation that you really bombed. It might come an hour afterward, right? But it's the awareness that, like, ooh, I wasn't brave. I didn't do this, this, or this. Like, oh, wow, that's kind of a pattern I have. Interesting. Eventually, the awareness will come in the moment of having the conversation. And then you'll be able to go to the B, which is take a breath, remember brave. And sometimes you will, maybe you won't be able to take the breath because maybe you're just word vomiting and it happens, and you still go down that same path, same pattern. Okay. Maybe next time you're able to take that breath and you should do something differently, but you still veer off. Okay, maybe the third time you take the breath and you remember brave, and then you get to the C, which is now you get to make the choice in the moment. And sometimes you have to go back to that person afterward and be like, I made the wrong choice. I kind of just continued on my normal path. I probably should have done this thing that I learned that I didn't really think about in that moment, but can I have a do-over? No one's ever said no. When you go back to them and you say, I could have done better in that conversation. I'm not really that proud of myself. I learned this thing. I always have people blame it on me. I learned this thing. I didn't do it. Can we try that again? Because I'd really like to do it better. Because I want this relationship to be more positive, right? To end on a positive note, for this to be able to move forward. No one in my own experience, in any of my clients' experiences, has ever been like, no. Because it's you being vulnerable and saying, I didn't do this very well. And the beauty is when your leadership team is going through something like this together, and then they're able to say, whether to a teammate, whether to someone, junior on the team, when they're able to go to them and say, the way that I handled that in that meeting wasn't really brave. I'm really working on getting better at that. Can I have a do-over? Oftentimes you don't have to do the whole thing over. You can just tell them what you would have done better. It saves time and is fine. You're modeling that you failed at something. And then you got back on the horse and tried it again and effectively made amends for it, right? But none of it feels like there's no guilt or shame. I'm a terrible person. There's no ego to it on either side. And it's like, I'm learning this thing. I tried it. I didn't do it very well. Can I try it again? Yeah, sure. Well, here's what I intended to do. Oh yeah, that actually would have gone over a lot better. Yeah, cool. Okay. So what do you want to do now? And you're past it. And I mean, a lot of people ask, like, oh, we have time for conversations? Do we have time for empathy? Do we have time for inclusion? Oh, that sounds like it's going to be so time. And it's like, when you learn how to have conversations in an effective way, they actually speed you up. They don't slow you down at all.
Yeah.
So,
well, it creates trust, and everybody's kind of going in the same direction, and there's probably less. You're more efficient in that way.
Well, that, and I mean, I've literally seen companies where, on one side, I'll take a tech company. When I got there, people were afraid to say I disagree, and they didn't. They didn't disagree. And, they were 12 to 18 months behind in their development, and the app wasn't great and the tech wasn't great. And it was all kind of like, why did we do it this way? Fast forward, when you're able to be in a meeting and a leader can be like, wait a minute, you look confused. Effectively, you're important. You're one of our head developers. Talk to me. What don't you understand? What do we need to explain something better? Does it not work? Tell us. What did I get wrong? And they can tell you in the moment. You save 6 to 12 to 18 months of time. I mean, 8, 9 figures. You save so much time, money, everything when you don't have to dance around it. And I mean, I feel like I always say leaders think that because people are quiet, that because there's silence, that everyone feels safe and everyone feels good. No, be afraid. Be very afraid of silence. Silence is not safety. Silence is a slow killer of culture, performance, velocity, your bottom line, most of the things that you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's transition to rapid fire. Did Mia tell you that was rapid fire? Super intense.
No.
Questions.
But this is
Gabe, you
fun.
want
Go. Do it.
to kick us off, and you're just gonna throw the word?
All right, these are really serious questions. What was the most unusual pizza topping you've ever tried?
It's not unusual. Pineapple? I feel like there's something more unusual than that.
Do you like
Pineapple's a big debate.
Are you a pineapple person?
I didn't hate it. I mean, here's a weird topping. My dad would put grated cheese on oatmeal.
Oh, that is pretty weird.
That's unusual.
That sounds very
He's
Italian.
an Italian. Italians think it's normal. My mom was like, gross, you're gross.
Do you have a travel mishap or an adventure gone wrong that in hindsight you find hysterical now?
Gone wrong.
That one's thought-provoking. I thought maybe she coughed one up to you that you just dug it out on the internet. Like,
I'm trying to think of one. I mean, I feel like I've been lucky in traveling alone. I haven't had that many mishaps or scary things happen.
well, that's a good
Kind
thing.
of grateful for that, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mia said, well, your first kid's on the way. Your travel mishaps are ahead of you then.
Oh yeah, they're coming. They're coming fast. I mean, we took our dog. Did she tell you? We took our dog on a walk and she threw up. And I feel like I can say this to people who have kids or who have pets. Otherwise, if you talk about throwing up or poop, like everyone just looks at you funny. She threw up a rat. So she'd eaten a rat.
Oh, jeez.
Well, that's better to get a rat out of her system.
Well, and
that's
then
really
we were
gross.
like going to the vet for the next week and like, did the rat die of rat poison? Is there rat poison in your system? So not really travel, but like neighborhood mishap. Like I'm like sitting here calling and going to the neighbors' homes, being like, "Do you have rat poison out? What kind is it? What's the brand? I have to tell the vet. Like, what's going on?"
That sounds like a New York mishap, not a Florida.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
All right, Gabe.
All right, the next one is what's your go-to facial expression?
All of them. My my first speaking coach still calls me Disney because he says I have a Disney face, and all of them. I don't have one. I have all of them.
You don't even need to use your hands. Everybody can know exactly what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Your face is like a buck.
Yeah.
What's your spirit animal and why?
My dog, Nala.
What kind of dog now?
A Frenchie.
Oh my God. No. We both have Frenchies. We're like, oh, our Frenchies. Mine's an alpha dog, Frenchie ruler of the world.
Do you,
What's yours
you
like?
both have Frenchies?
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, they're like
They are related.
They're
They are
brothers.
Stop. She is. I mean, she's this like little. First, she loves to snuggle, and like she's just. I don't know. She demands your attention. She's not shy. She's like, "Hey, me, right now." Um, she, yeah, she's the tiniest alpha at the dog park. So like, she won't go in the little dog park because they're just not fun enough. So she has to go in the big dog park, and then she gets the big dog. So her name is Nala. If you've ever seen The Lion King, Nala always
Yeah.
gets Simba on his back and stands on top of him and goes, Pinja. She literally does that to dogs 3 times her size and gets on top of them when they're on their backs. And she's like,
That's funny.
Did it. It's so funny.
Oh my God. Yeah. That sounds familiar.
All right. Favorite hobby?
Ooh. I mean, I feel like I have to say working out because I lose my sanity if I don't move. I mean, being an athlete through college, if I don't move, I can't think. So CrossFit has just been a savior. It also, I found it right after losing my dad. So it helped with like finding strength and like challenging yourself and like walking in and being like, there's no way I can do that, to, wow, I just did the hardest thing of my day. And that was okay. Move on. So I probably have to say that because I feel wrong saying drawing, because when I was a little kid, I loved drawing. Like I was an art minor in school, but I don't make the time for it now. So I can't say that because I don't do enough of it.
What's the most impactful author you have read and why?
I have to say Seth Godin, because he thinks like my dad. And my other answer would be Sebastian Unger, because Tribes was so good. I mean, I can also quote you too many psychological people that I love, but I Seth Godin is like number one fave. Yeah, that's my final answer.
So other than sitting at the table with your father, what's a childhood memory that really stands out to you?
Do I have a theme?
Sure.
No, she's asking you for a theme.
Yeah, something to do with family.
This is the first thing that came to me, so don't judge me. We were in Italy because my dad's family was still there, is still there. And we were going to go to the beach. No, we had gone to the beach and we were going to have dinner. And I was tiny and I had a glass of water sitting somewhere. And I guess it was my dad had like gin, and I grabbed my glass of water and it was gin and I drank it. And apparently I've had this expressive face my whole life because the face that I made, I mean, they still say like, we wish we had it on camera, because whatever I did must have been absolutely hilarious, because they've talked about it for 30 something years.
So it's all traced back to the gin.
Yeah. That's where it all
Like, knock
started.
the whole thing back.
I'm going to add one more here. Is that a Unimatic light behind you?
No, it's just on a stack of books.
Oh, but there's is there a coffee pot in front of the light? Or it looks just like the coffee pot picture we have.
So there's a light, and the light has shelves. And so on the shelves are books, and then there's a Unimatic sitting right there.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like a Unimatic light.
It does. It looks like you made it into a light series too, for lamps for desks.
I mean, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, the show's called Discover the Difference. So last two questions, we tie back in discovery and difference. If you want to kick off discovery, Gabe.
Sure. This is the one where you're looking back, given all your life experience now, and you're talking to your younger self. What kind of advice would you give Elisabeth, young Elisabeth?
I feel like I've
knowing what you know now.
There's so many things going through my head right now. I think it would be, one, I would tell her, like, I've got you, like, you're fine, you're not alone. And two, I think I would say receive more. Like, don't stop trying to do everything for everyone all the time, because you're just going to burn out. And I had to learn that the hard way a couple times, but allow other people to do things for you too, and trust. Kind of like delegate, because I feel like I always want to do as much as I can, and more isn't always better. So I wish I learned that a little earlier.
Pretty good reflection.
I like that. It kind of puts me into, can I ask one more question before you go? Because you talked in the beginning about this conflict, with your dad about doing stuff, were you doing it for him or are you doing it for yourself? And in the beginning, you didn't want to do anything that he was bringing to the table, because it wasn't for you. And I kind of, I had this similar conversation with my 19-year-old daughter where she started asking the question to herself, was I doing this for you and to make you happy versus to make me happy?
Mhm.
And went through a very long, drawn out conversation about it, which was ends up being very beautiful. But I kind of wanted to ask you, how have you been able to resolve that? Where are you now doing these things like Unimatics and other things you're doing? Are you doing them for yourself or are you doing them for your father?
Totally for myself now. I think when I was doing them for my dad, it was my way of navigating grief, to be honest. And it was like, I need you here with me in some capacity. So I'm going to cling on to this. And little by little, I mean, that Caffè Unimatic was effectively like my vehicle to process things. And so like there would be little things that needed to fall away, like the original logo or rebranding something or redoing something or rewriting something. And initially it was like, I've got to keep everything that he had. And then it was like, but it doesn't work. And like, no. And so it was just like this and I could tell I'm fighting. And then I could tell when I wanted to start making it about something else, something bigger. And it didn't all have to circle around what it was and preserve everything. It's like this actually needs to grow to be able to preserve it more as a thing. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the process, I don't know if it's grief in particular, but I think it led me more to my own intuition, or at least the way I did it, which I'm very, very grateful for.
Well, it's interesting because you said in the beginning, or you referenced early in the podcast about how different you are and you were as a 6-year-old child, and it's a theme too for us. As you researched our company, we use the phrase unapologetically different quite a bit. If you were a list of ingredients, what's the secret sauce ingredient that makes you different?
Something having to do with the curiosity about people. Like I there's something, the way that I always define empathy in Brave is the brain tends to judge, but rather than judging, try and trump it with curiosity. I don't know if it's just I had a lot of practice or I don't have that gene. I don't know, but like it takes me a bit to judge. So when someone does something terrible, I'm like, "Oh, I wonder like what kind of pain they must have been in." So that like I'm not saying like, "Oh, you're an awful person. I'm going to write you off and move on with my day." I'm like, something had to happen for you to think that was a good plan, right? And it there's something about the curiosity about people, and maybe it's the faith in people that's like no one's born bad. So like something had to happen for you to get here or do that or, say that or whatever it was. And so I'm endlessly fascinated by like, what were you like when you were 7? Like, what were you like when you were 4? Like, I was the kid that would ask about Disney movies, what was the villain like when they were like 3 years old? And my parents would be like, yeah, I don't know.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great. I guess that's really, about compassion, right?
It is,
It's
yeah.
finding compassion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
I
love
mean-
it.
I mean,
Oh, sorry. We have a little delay there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it actually made me think of the very first Brave conversation I ever ran was for 9/11 survivors, first responders, the Muslim community, and students. And so the goal was getting to empathy. Like the goal was bringing people that believed really different things together around a table. And I mean, it was over coffee, obviously, but it was to demonstrate that like, just follow this framework and like everyone's going to agree. We're going to take the brave pledge and then we're going to have this conversation. And what we got to was we all had the exact same fears and hopes. They just looked different based on our life experience or what people had told us or our parents or, you know, society or whatever. But we all had the exact same hopes and fears when you got down in there. And I don't know, I think that's kind of at the core of, I don't know, a belief maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, for the listeners out there who want to connect with you, whether it be on your coffee background and offerings through your company or Brave or TedX, we didn't even talk about the fact that your coffee company was featured on Coffee for All, right, on Netflix.
Yeah.
Where should they go to learn more about you or reach out to you directly?
They can go to, they can go to braveconversations.com. They can go to caffeunimatic.com. They can, currently my Instagram is at Caffè Unimatic. There's a Brave framework there. We need to redo some of those to figure out how you actually find me. But yeah, I mean, whether braveconversations.com or Caffè Unimatic, you can find me in any and all of those places.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. It was really thought-provoking. And your father sounds like one hell of a man. So it was great getting to hear about him and the impact on your life.
I love it. I feel like I always love talking to parents and dads about, there are so many things, especially knowing you have a girl. Like, there are just so many things about, you don't realize how much of an impact you have until, I don't know, someone who's had a weird experience like me is able to be like, no, 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 no. That thing you did when she was 6, that meant something. Like, you're important. Every second of what you do is important.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thanks for sharing with us.